there's no good time to do it. There's no right time to do it. There will always be a million reasons to not, pull out anchor and go. I think the COVID lockdown, right? So in a way, paradoxically, like ironically, pushed us to become, adapting a nomadic lifestyle. Maybe it's like a dramatic overcompensation to the lockdown. Since we got married before even kids, right? We kind of always had this sort of like a fantasy in our head. It's like, oh, it'd be nice when the kids, however many we have, when they're like old enough to appreciate it, but not quite teenager yet, right? That we can, spend like maybe like a year, traveling the world as a family. But actually, a lot of people who can do it, the limit is sort of self-imposed, right? In terms of day-to-day reality, right? It's sort of like one of those, it's both incredibly mundane and incredibly exciting. That's a whole family. Like unequivocally, we can say, right? Like I think the time we have together, right, essentially definitely, make us closer than ever. That sounds crazy, right? It's like, how can you possibly be going to all these places, traveling the world, and save money? Unexpected things will happen when you're on the road, right? So just be really open to it, because it will be strange and scary and weird, right? But it will mostly turn out to be wonderful. Yeah, it's kind of fun, right? I mean, to do something, that is obviously, I think for most people, it's just like, oh, it's fantastic, right? Like, and then obviously there's a reality which is fantastic, but more nuanced, right?
100%. I think a lot of people just have that dream of traveling from a young age, and then the reality of life makes it that we have adult responsibilities and, in your
Right.
case, children and all these things. And so people kind of get busy with that, and they don't consider that there could be an alternative way of,
Yeah.
experiencing a different lifestyle or living a different way. And
Right. I mean, my wife and I talk about it, right? Which is, I mean, I don't want to do one of those like travel influencer and thing, which is like everyone can do this. I'm like, it's not true, right? Like there are real sort of like, physical, mental, financial constraint. That means that some people really literally cannot do it, right? But then there are actually a lot of people who can do it. The limit is sort of self-imposed, right? It's like, oh, I cannot possibly, or maybe in 15 years when X, Y, and Z, happens, right? So, well, those feels very much sort of artificial limit that you put on it, right? So it's one of those, like, it's hard to know, right? When you're in that situation, when you're in a comfortable life that you're sort of stationary, to sort of remove these barriers that are not real, that is stopping you from doing this. But then also, I think there's real, percentage of people who say, "Oh my God, this is amazing. I would love to do it," but they don't actually want to do it. It's just something I feel like, at least within American context, there's this sort of a worshiping of wanderlust a little bit, right? So people feel like they have to say, "Oh my God, I would love to do it one day." Where if they really kind of like look at it themselves, they're like, I don't actually want to do it. I just feel pressure to say, right, that I want to do it one day, which is okay too. Just like sort of like, just know thyself, right? Like
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. So maybe let me do a little intro to kind of
Yes.
give context to this conversation. And I actually went back in my photo albums to try to figure out when we actually met. And so I had moved to Seattle in early 2005, and as I was going through my photos, we actually met in either October or no, like in the fall, basically between October and December. So I found my a photo of a few people who were in the organization that you had started, and I'll let you talk about that a little bit maybe. And then I found a photo of your wife Sky and I
Oh,
from
nice.
December, and then in the same event, I have a photo of you with your wife. So if you want, I'm
very
happy.
cool. Yeah, and
I'm
that's the
happy.
thing, right? Like obviously for the thing that I sort of in a way started back in the days in my early 20s in Seattle, right? On a whim, right? Essentially this organization called, Beam, right? Essentially it was something meant to be fairly casual, right? Which is like, hey, like there's all these people in their 20s. A lot of us work in tech, and Seattle had the reputation of being fairly kind of a socially awkward, isolating place. So it'd be nice if we can kind of get together and do some socializing, like at bars or whatever, and maybe we can raise some money for some worthwhile organization. Maybe we can spend some time doing some hands-on volunteering work, which a lot of us did back in college, right? And then once you start working, you seem to make it harder. That's it. That was the intent, right? It's like, hey, just people who probably are thinking about the same way to get together. And obviously, there was like this period of time where it became a lot bigger, right, in Seattle and actually beyond, right, like in places like Shanghai, right? Like there was a few cities like this idea like really took off, right? And then it sort of slowly faded, right, as we kind of all sort of grew out of it. But then to see a lot of the connections that were made during that time, and then it kept going, and then sort of in a way the seed that was planted and see what it became. Like even this, right? Like between the two of us, right? Like who could have foreseen where you were going to end up, where I was going to end up on these amazing adventure, and then we managed to stay in contact, right? Based on that little moments of connection, like back in our 20s, right? Right. It's kind of
Yeah.
crazy, right?
Well, thank you for putting that together. I mean, for me personally, I remember back in the day, just, moving to Seattle. And one of the things that I had done a bunch of in college, which was volunteering. I had worked with a variety of nonprofits, and I was trying to, help as much as I can. And so as I was looking for opportunities to do that, I had come across Bean, and I think it was really cool to, just give back time to different organization and
Yeah.
support the people while connecting with other people. So
Oh, yeah.
I just really fond
Yeah, because I
memories
mean
from that time.
that was kind of the original genesis, right? Was the fact that I wasn't sort of a native grown Seattleite either, right? But I came to Seattle when I was 13, right? So obviously since I went to university there, it felt like home, right? And I keep meeting people through work and whatnot, right? Who are like transplants in their 20s, and they all said that like, oh, it's very hard to meet people here, and I was like, it doesn't feel that way to me, but I get it, right? Because I've been here and I have a building network through university and high school and all that, right? So I thought, like, is there a better way to help people who just move here, right? To kind of like plug in more easily, right? So that was it, right? So in a way, then it kind of took on a life of its own, right?
So
Yeah.
maybe before we drill down to how you ended up in Paris right now, running a company and traveling with your family rather than, being in Seattle. I think we had a similar kind of pattern around, we spent a bunch of time in Seattle, but then I guess the world was calling us in different ways. And then we find ourselves traveling full time around the world. We do it differently. You have your wife, you have two teenagers. And so I'd love to drill down a little bit into the lifestyle and all of that. But before we get there, can you walk us from, living a stationary life and being in Seattle, having your career, to ending up traveling full time? I know we've talked about it a little bit last time we chatted, but I'd love to hear back from you and sharing with others
Right.
on how you went from, living that typical lifestyle to traveling the world now.
Yeah, and I think really, if I had to point at sort of one event that really sort of kicked everything in motion, and I think it's a common thing actually for quite a few folks like us is COVID. I think the COVID lockdown, right? So in a way, paradoxically, like ironically, pushed us to become, adapting a nomadic lifestyle. Maybe it's like a dramatic overcompensation to the lockdown, right? I don't know, right? I think for us, right, the seed of that was the fact that because COVID, especially since we're in Seattle, where school locked down really, really early, right? So effectively for a year and a half, right? Essentially, K to 12 kids were all 100% right virtual schooling it, right? And my daughter was kindergarten, right, at the time. You can't put a kindergarten in front of a Zoom for 6 hours a day and expect anything to happen, right? Like that concept by itself is sort of ridiculous, right? So we effectively because Seattle school district was very flexible, they say that's fine, right? You can sort of like, as long as you check the minimum, right, and deliver sort of the base requirement, you don't have to attend, right? Like do what you need to do to get through this tough period, right? So we effectively sort of, I guess there was no term for it. Like we semi withdrew them from the Seattle public school, right? Just basically we had arrangements like we will show up in a very early to do like roll call and like say hi to teacher and kids, and we'll of course do whatever assignment, but otherwise they're not going to sit in front of Zoom, right? And we did that throughout COVID. And I think that is like the first seed, which gave us as parents sort of the confidence that, hey, if we need to homeschool our kids, we can do it because we were effectively forced to do it for a year and a half, right? So that kind of gave us that first plank, shall we speak, that leads to the sort of the nomadic lifestyle, right? So then, so that was that, right? But then, the COVID lockdown ended and we had an opportunity to move to New York, but we just kind of moved them back into, a regular in-person public school. But like that skill set, that memory of being able to homeschool and all the advantage and disadvantage of that, right, sort of stuck with us, right? So that was there, right? Kind of receded into background, but it was there, right? And then when my work opportunity in New York ended, right, and I was contemplating what to do next, and there were opportunities where I was going to say yes to, and my wife, being much smarter than I am, in many things, but reminded me that I think since we got married, before even kids, right, we kind of always had this sort of like a fantasy in our head. I was like, oh, it'd be nice when the kids, however many we have, when they're like old enough to appreciate it, but not quite teenager yet, right? That we can, spend like maybe like a year, traveling the world as a family, right? Before they become proper teenagers and they kind of are off doing their own thing, right? Kind of like the last hurrah. And middle school is kind of a social pressure cooker, right? So maybe we can help escape that, a little bit, help them be more grounded center people before putting them back in for high school. I think just variety of reason, it was just like, oh, those would be great, right? So when the opportunity in New York, ended, and I was contemplating the next gig, my wife was like, well, maybe take a pause for a minute, right? Like this is the time, right? Essentially, at the time, my son was 11, and my daughter was 8, turning on 9. Right? It's like, this is it, right? This is the perfect time. This is exactly it, right? You don't have work commitment. Like her work was flexible, right? Essentially, like all the stars have aligned, right? And then since we were like, and I think we can, homeschool, digital school, world school, whatever term you want to put on it, because of our COVID lockdown experience, right? We kind of did the math, and we basically decided like, let's go, right? Right. This is as star aligned as you're going to get. Right. So that's a combination. I think the work situation, blah, 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 that feel like was the starting gun. But when we looked at it, it's like, yes, but I think it was the COVID lockdown, right? Like that was the real starting gun. We just didn't know it yet. It's like we were sort of like started it, and then they waited 2 more years, and then, we're, out the door.
No, as you were saying, I think a lot of people that I meet traveling and having this digital nomad lifestyle, many people was literally just trying to escape a lockdown somewhere. And then for some people, it was just like, oh, let me go to Mexico on holiday and maybe work remotely for 2 weeks. And then, you run into them 2 or 3 years later, and it's like, oh yeah, I never went back, and I was able to find a full-time remote job and really change the way I live life.
Right. I think because of us, or because like working kids, like we weren't able to like immediately get out the door, but it definitely still planted the seed that like 2 years later, right, then off we go.
100%. Okay, so you're traveling full time now. You're traveling as a family. So what does it really look like? So in terms of what's the typical day in your family, in terms of you having to work, your wife having to do some work, the kids having some schooling, but also being in a new place and having the desire to explore and see the place. So help me understand how you think about your itinerary, maybe. What do you plan before you get there? And then once you get there, what's the typical week like?
Sure. So let me talk about sort of the planning, then we'll talk about the day-to-day. Maybe that makes more sense, right? I think we're not able to be quite as spontaneous because of kids and sort of the work logistics sort of consideration. So we have to be, I think, a little bit more planful, if that's a word, right? Than maybe otherwise we would have, right? So generally, we have pretty detailed lockdown plan in terms of where we'll be, right? Kind of the structure of like how we're going to get there, where we're going to stay, kind of like a rolling 6 months ahead, right? So right now, being beginning of May, we know for sure where we're going to be, right, for November and December, right? Like we have accommodation, travel, pretty much planned out, right? So we know how to get there, we know where we're going to be, right? And then sort of some of the major things that we have to do, accommodating work schedule and schooling requirements and all that, right? So 6 months ahead, we have pretty good plan, and right now we're sort of like vision boarding, right? Imagining like what's the month 7 to 12, ahead of us is going to look like, right? I think that's literally the discussion that we will have like every couple of weeks. So it's like, okay, we got December now, sort of locked down. So let's start talking about what January, February is going to look like next year, right? Like directionally, sort of like, hey, these is the places we always wanted to go, or is there any sort of like specific requirement that say we should be in this particular part of the world because of work or family or school or anything, right? So we kind of sort of, that's kind of our pattern is, ready to go for the next 3 months, right? Like really detailed plan, right? And then month 4 to 6, major accommodation, travel, pretty much locked down. And then months 7 and 12 ahead of us, right? Sort of ideas, right? So that's our pattern, and it sort of worked out pretty well. It's gonna give us a combination of sort of lower cost, right, and a little bit of certainty, right? But without sort of being so organized that there's no room for sort of like spontaneous plan change, right? If we want them, right? So that's kind of how our planning process work, right? In terms of day-to-day reality, right? It's sort of like one of those. It's both incredibly mundane and incredibly exciting, right? Depends on how you remind yourself, right? So the school and as well as the work the grown-ups have structure, has expectation in terms of things that needs to be done, but afford us quite a bit of flexibility in terms of like when we do it and how we do it, right? And that's kind of how we set it up, right? Obviously, work with the company that I'm with, right? that is sort of like something I selected, right, to make sure that, of course, there's certain days where like something must be done by this time, and not just any work, right? But in general, like there's not a lot of sort of like formal structure or what I call like butt in seat sort of requirement, right? Even for remote working, I think there are quite a few companies that adapt a sort of big brothers approach, right? Like your Slack status must be, on a certain number of hours a day. Your location must be visible, right? Now, when you get a ping, you must be ready to respond within a certain number of minutes, right? So then I'm like, okay, well then I'm not sure what the point of that is, like remote when there's in a way more scrutiny than ever and more monitoring than ever, over sort of how you do your work versus thankfully, right, the company I'm with, Whereby, which has been 100% remote, since pretty much day one, right? Culturally, right, it is incredibly supportive, right, incredibly trusting, right, that we're all sort of invested and professionals, right? Like we can get our things done without that level of scrutiny. So that worked out great. And the schooling choice that we picked for our kids, now almost 2 years in, right? It's similar, right? Philosophy, right? It's a UK-based virtual school called King's Inner High, right? And it's actually a pretty, sort of a program that with a pretty decent amount of track record, right? In terms of delivering both like something really high quality, right? But also affords a lot of flexibility, right? You can basically move like whether you want to attend specific classes live or async, right? And there's very clear expectation of, deliverable that needs to be done. But then they have like a lot of the things that the kids really are looking forward to, right? In terms of like socialization with their peer, in terms of like after school, programs, right? So it sort of gave us that structure and flexibility, and we can sort of dial it up and down, right, as we see. So there will be days where, we don't have any sort of, mental energy to go explore anything. So then we stay at our, Airbnb or whatever, where the kids are just doing school live, hanging out with their friends virtually. And then, every opportunity we have, we try to sign them up for any kind of like local IRL, right? Like in-person, events, right? So in Paris, my son is doing fencing. And I think this afternoon, we're all going to the local public swimming pool, right, to get some lap time in, right? So, as much as we can, physical activity, socialization, right, that kind of happened throughout the day, but, fairly mundane, right? Then I'm working, we go on neighborhood walk, we make dinner, right? So feel very domestic. And then there are days where we're like, no, let's table everything in terms of school and work, right? Because of there's a thing. Like yesterday, because we're in Paris, they had a bread festival, right? Essentially, just like it's a boulangerie festivity. So we're like, yeah, no, we gotta go hit that up, right? And Monday should be the least amount of crowd, right? Since everybody else have to go to the office, right? So let's go, right? So we went. It was like, hey, for half a day we're gonna, skip out and then basically go and do this thing and, you know, taste a bunch of bread, right? So, so there are opportunities where we get to do that, right? So it sounds, I guess, quote unquote, boring, just because it's work is school, right? It's making dinner, right? But at the same time, right, when you zoom out, you're like, oh my god, like the things that we get to do, in a way, spontaneously, right? It's pretty incredible, right? So that's kind of what is sort of planning and what day to day is like.
If I was to ask your kids about their experience, what would they say? Like, and I guess when they talk maybe to other kids, where maybe they're in contact with some of their cousins or family members. So like, I'm just wondering on what their perspective is. What would you think they will say about this experience, like right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, they're teenager and preteen, so like their first response is going to be like, it's not like whatever, right? Like nothing impresses them, right? So that's the default, right? But hopefully, once you get beyond that sort of a slightly annoying teenager layer, right? I think what they will tell you is that, I think I'm very grateful that they are sort of very appreciative of this opportunity that they have, right? So I think, they often mention sort of like they do feel very grateful and lucky, right, that they can have this experience, especially when I remind them, like, you could just be sitting in the classroom right now, right, butt in seat at your classroom versus, walking the street of like Belgrade, or Seoul, right, on a spontaneous basis, right? So they're aware of sort of how happy and sort of unusual this lifestyle is, right? I think what they have told me what they like about it, of course, like the flexibility, seeing the world, and not just like the museum. I think generally when I ask them like what are their favorite parts of certain place, it's like little things that I don't necessarily even notice it myself, right? Because kids notice things, right? Like, and then they also kind of have their own weird little fun memory between the siblings that they constructed that have no idea, right? Like when we're talking about like our time in Spain, for instance, they always fondly recall when we were in Malaga and we were staying at this Airbnb, and somebody, I don't know, dropped like a half-eaten sandwich like in the stairwell, and for 3 days they were just fascinated watching the sandwich seemingly sort of get kicked down the stairs and then came back up the stairs, right? Like every day, like the sandwich is moving. I did not notice. Like I don't know what they were talking about, but then they created their own like fantasy story about like the magical sandwich, right? That sort of is moving around and like having adventure in the street of Malaga on their own, right? And then like I heard them, they tell me the story, like the story keep getting more and more magical and sort of expanded, right? In terms of like what is the sandwich up to, right? In the street of Malaga, right? So things like that, right? Like they're kids, right? They construct their own reality, but it's fun to watch them kind of weave in these like little detail, right? That to them is very normal, right? But I think it's one of those things they're gonna look back, right, and say like, "Oh my God, that was really special," or not. Maybe they'll just stay teenagers and just be not impressed with anything.
I mean, I think with perspective, like I would have loved to have what they're experiencing now. Like, I think as you were saying, maybe a few years down the road, they may look back and realize how incredible it's been to have such unique experience.
Yeah, and then I think one of the interesting in terms of how they interact with, I mean, I think with new friends, which are they either meet spontaneously locally or online. Obviously, it's in a way easier for the new friends to sort of appreciate what we're doing, right? But obviously, it's a little bit harder to sort of explain to friends that they're still in contact with, from our more stationary days, right? So I have to remind them, in a way, this is kind of an interesting challenge: is how to talk about the experience we're having with friends who are not, part of this lifestyle, in a way that doesn't come across as incredibly pretentious.
Mhm.
Right. So I remember my daughter, before we came to Paris the first time around, she's not a big fan of baguette. Like all the baguette that she's ever had, she's like, it's too hard and crusty. She doesn't like it. Right. And of course, when we came to Paris, I was like, hey, this is where, these world famous food items are from. You should have to try it. And she had it. And it's like, she loved it. Now she's a huge baguette fan, except she started talking to her friends. I was like, you know what? I actually only like baguette when I'm in Paris. I don't like it anywhere else. Right. And I was like, okay, you can't say it that way because it come across as incredibly spoiled and pretentious. But she's like, that's true. Right. Like, baguette everywhere else is bad. I'm like, I understand that. Right. But find a different way of saying that, right? Because without context, right, that sounds like what spoiled brats say. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. It was like, way I had to sort of remind them to code switch a little bit, right? It's essentially to friends and family, right, who either want to do this lifestyle but cannot, or sort of are confused about our sort of lifestyle choice, right? To sort of talk to them in a way that, I don't know, doesn't unnecessarily create tension, for lack of a better word. Yeah. So and in a way, it's not that different than the, I think, social interaction for adults, right? When one party is sort of doing this, right, and another one is sort of in a way feel like they're sort of trapped in the suburb and in a grind, right? How do you talk to them without make it sound like you're just sort of bragging about your lifestyle? Because in a way, you're just describing what feels very normal day to day, right? But I think to people who are in a different circumstances, it'd be like, oh, you're just showing off, right? So I think it's an interesting. It's very much a champagne problem, but it's still a problem nonetheless. I don't know if that's something you have ever run into.
Yeah, like I think it's interesting you bring that up. I almost find that there is a gap between my different groups of friends because I have many friends that I've made or that I've gotten closer to over the last years because we share travel lifestyle, we travel a bunch together, and then people, some of my what I'll call my old friends that I maybe knew from before this having this lifestyle, and it's almost like there are two sides of my personality. It's like what I talk with, like as an example, with my travel friends, we almost never talk about careers. We never talk
Sure.
about promotions or the bonus. Like it's the whole world, the corporate world. It almost doesn't exist, and people tend to be maybe more free spirited. Maybe they're not as driven by money. They're not as driven by a certain set of values. Versus if I find myself in San Francisco or Seattle, my friends there have just different life goals and different
Right.
objectives, and their day-to-day what's on top of mind for them is very different. So we might have very different, we might talk about technology and the evolution of AI, and like I enjoy both worlds, but they're very much separate conversation. And I think I agree that one has to be very thoughtful about how one talks about how they live their life. I think people are definitely curious when you go back to let's say you go back to Seattle and you talk about, they might ask you a question. They're like, oh, you've been traveling for a while. It's like, oh, great. Like, how long? And it's like, oh, yeah, for the last 7.5 years. And it's almost like, what? Like, how does it work? So then they're very curious. And so I think that's the point around being able to demystify some of it. And I think a lot of these podcast episodes are about just doing that, not having to
Yeah.
re-explain it, and really just explain that it's not that it's this luxurious lifestyle, because a lot of people
Right.
imagine that it's like, let's say you live in the suburb, you work full time, and you
Right.
decide to go on vacation for 2 weeks in Hawaii from
Right.
Seattle. And so then it's kind of like you imagine, you have your expenses in Seattle. You have to book this expensive hotel because you only get 2 weeks off and you want to make the most of it. And then
I only have 2 weeks. I'm not gonna do laundry, right? Like.
exactly. And so people look at it and say, oh, it's so expensive. But in reality, going on vacation is very different in terms
Yes.
of cost, but also in terms of what you do day to day. As you were saying, certain days are
Right.
very mundane. You just kind of wake up and you just want to kind
Right.
of chill at home, which you may
Vacation
do.
is about leaving your quote unquote normal life behind for a little bit, right? Versus nomadic lifestyle. Like this is your normal life, right? And if you want to demystify, whether digital nomad life is luxurious, let me show you my kitchen full of line drying laundry right now, right? So that does not look like the life of rich and famous, right?
I mean, there are different ways of doing it. I just
Right.
think that what makes it special is not the fact that, you're staying in really expensive places. As you were saying, the kids appreciating these little things that are happening day to day. Or
Right.
personally, one of my favorite things is just to walk around the street and,
Yes.
in different cultural context. You kind of just watching how people live their lives, and you may sit down in a main square, I don't know, in
Right.
Spain, and just being able to sit there and people watch ends up
Yeah.
being the highlight of the, because it's just so interesting to see how different cultures, tend to function, and how different people live their lives.
Right, exactly, right. So it's definitely one of those things where in a way, being the nomadic lifestyle where you're sort of constantly encountering, the new different cultures, kind of help you with this, right? Because in a way, you constantly have to um, you know, code switch, right? It's sort of like, you enter a new culture and you have to sort of like observe and learn what is appropriate, what are they interested in, and all of that, right? So you can apply that exact same skill, right? But instead of transcending, like, I guess, like not like national border or culture, you're sort of transcending between sort of like nomadic lifestyle and more sort of stationary culture, right? You're still crossing a cultural line, right? And you're sort
Yeah.
of adapting, right? To sort of like, it's like, hey, I know we're not living the same thing, right? But I would love to show you, about my life. And I remember when I used to be, in that lifestyle, right? So in a way, you're sort of adapting to that, right? So it's the same skill.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, another thing that I often think about is, the whole like validation bias, because you'll talk, to some people who may not have this lifestyle, but then they might dismiss it, and it's like, oh no, that's, I'm too old for that, or that's not for me, because ultimately they
Right.
want to validate. And then the same thing on the other side, you hear all these people living this lifestyle, and it's like, oh my God, it's so amazing, and so they keep focusing on all the positive things, which are many and are great. But as you were saying
Right.
earlier, it is not for everybody. And it's
No.
not always, sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes you may get sick
Right.
in a foreign country, far away from your support system, from your family.
Oh, for
Sometimes
sure.
you may have to deal with, issues that otherwise wouldn't be relevant if you were having that lifestyle. So definitely pros and cons on both sides. And
Yeah.
if
Right.
I think if it's the right fit for you based on your values, your desire, your goals, etc., it can be incredible. But if that's not aligned, then it can be a terrible experience.
Oh, for sure. I mean, like when you're ill, especially when your kids are sick, right? I think that's kind of usually you have like that moment. It's like, oh my God, I wish we would have more sort of stationary comfort, especially if you fall ill on travel days, right? When days where you have to go, right, and you're
Yeah.
not feeling 100%. That's rough, right? Those are the days like when you're like you're sick, or maybe worse, like when your kids are sick and you're like dragging them, with all the stuff, right, to get on the the transportation, vehicle. Then you're like, oh my God, like I'm being a terrible parent, right? Like these are days where they should just stay in bed and like drink hot cocoa or whatever, right? But you're like, no, we're loading onto this bus because we have to get to Istanbul, right? Right. So they're definitely ups and down, right? But of course, when you zoom out as a whole, right, it's obviously we are deciding, right, that there's a lot more sort of upside and downside. So then we keep going, right? But then we meet people, right, where the lifestyle is sort of open ended, but not necessarily always forever committed. Right. So then people coming for a landing, right? It's possible that within the next year, like we were self, we're coming for a landing, but even that might not be permanent either, right? That you potentially will take off again, right? So once you're done it, even if you're stationary for a while, I don't think it completely leaves you, right? So then you're like, okay, well, the last couple of years of being stationary was great, but then maybe it's time to go again, right?
How do you think about, like how you travel now versus maybe 2 years ago, or I
Yeah.
guess kind of looking
In
back in
in
time?
the beginning or versus now,
No, and
right?
yeah, kind of what you've learned over the last 2 years, or I guess maybe
Yeah,
when you left, what was your intention around the
right.
travel, and maybe as you start doing it, you've adapted. I guess in
Right.
retrospect, what are you doing differently now versus when you started, or how, or like kind of looking back, what do you wish you knew before you started, or what advice would you give others that maybe want to embark in the same journey?
Also, like what we're doing now, right? Almost at the actually 1 month away from the 2 year mark versus what we started with, right? Are pretty different because when we started out, we thought it was a 1 year, right? We called it sort of a 1 year sabbatical, right? Like it was not this open-ended nomadic lifestyle, right? It was, neither of us work, right? My wife and I, right? And we're gonna spend a year, right, enjoying the world, and then come back to something, not necessarily New York or Seattle, but somewhere, right? Essentially, where we had to, live a quote unquote normal lifestyle, again, right? It was a 1 year break. So that's how we started, right? And I think situation evolved, right? Essentially, I came across and joined this amazing work opportunity with Whereby, right? Which is by definition, right, completely 100% perfectly suitable for a nomadic lifestyle, right? So in a way, we kind of latch onto the circumstances that change, and it became open ended, right? So I think it sort of evolved pretty drastically from the beginning to now, right? So given that, right, the idea is that actually, did I say 2 years? I come up on 3 years, right? So it's actually kind of crazy. Time flies, right? So what has changed, right, is that in the beginning, because we had a very specific end date we assumed was there, right? Even though we keep telling ourselves, it's like, hey, we want to like really immerse ourselves in the places we go to. You can't help it, right? Like you end up sort of we're moving at fairly high velocity because you want to see and do it all, right? I think the first 6 months. I mean, if you look at the sort of the velocity of our movement, it really sort of like keeps slowing down, right? Essentially, we started our trip with a kind of a all American, classic road trip over the summer, right, of 23, where we just wanted to go from East Coast to West Coast. So we were literally just like moving every single day, right? Essentially, go to national park, different campsite, different city, right? And then even then, when we landed in Europe, we were pretty much moving from city to city, country to country, like every week or two, right? Like we go never less than 1 week, but generally not more than 2 weeks. Like we were sort of moving, which is one of those things like it's kind of funny, right? Because compared to when you only had like the corporate America 2 weeks vacation, staying 1 week at a city feels very luxurious, right? Because when you have 2 weeks, they're like, oh, we're going to move like every 2 days. We got to see it all, right? So compared to before, it's like, oh, a week or 2 weeks at a place, that feels like so much time, right? But then as we keep slowing down, right? Essentially, last time we were in Paris, we were here for 3 months, right? So then we look back to a year prior, just like, oh, we were only in Paris for 2 weeks. Like, that was nothing, right? Yeah. So in a way, like that sort of continuously slowing down and sort of in a way get out of that rhythm, right? Of like time is limited, we must see it all, right? It's like instead of kind of going deeper, appreciating a place more, right? I think that's part of it, right? But also like it's like you can't have it all, right? But I think one of the interesting push and pull is, but then you talk to friends who are sort of following your travel, and you tell them where you have been, right, in the last 6 months. They're like, oh, so you only were in like 3 places, right? It's like, oh, you're like, I would have seen more. Then you start getting into your head, oh, maybe we're too slow. Maybe we need to see more. Like there are all these places that we haven't been to, right? Then you have to kind of remind yourself, like, we're not doing this for other people. It's not a race, right? Like, right. Take a breath, right? Then we do what we want, right? Which is incredibly lucky, right, to be able to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Like the rhythm of travel is definitely one that is like it's I'm very similar experience. Like when I started, I was just moving like days at a time. And even like you're like, oh yeah, I was in Mexico for a month and a half, but when you zoom out, you're like, oh, I stayed in like 20 different Airbnbs and hotels because I was here for 3 days, and then some friends said, oh, let's do a weekend trip over there, and so you go do that, and then a week later, you're like, oh, there's this other thing we can go do, and so you're constantly moving and doing things, but then over time, it took me a while, but then eventually slowed down as well, and it's just as you were saying, like I look back, and I think in the last 12 months, I think I've been to maybe 1 or 2 new countries, and so that pattern of I think the push and pull is also around, oh, do I go back to that place that I really like? It's like explore versus exploit kind of pattern. or do I go to this new place I always wanted to go? And so now I think over, like in the beginning, it was very much like, oh, I always wanted to go to that country. I always wanted to go to that city. I always wanted to go have that experience. Versus now it's like, yeah, it's either that or I can go visit my friends in that country that I really like, and I can just spend a month, surfing or hanging out in that
Yeah.
city and doing some work. So yeah, it's, there is no right or wrong. It's whatever
It's not
flows.
right or wrong, right? I mean, this past weekend, right? It was a not a holiday in France, but it was a holiday in the UK. And since the kids follow a UK school table, they didn't have class on Monday, right? So my wife and I spontaneously thought about like, hey, we wanted to go check out Krakow, right, in Poland, and the season's right, so maybe we can go, and the flight is actually pretty affordable, so maybe we go, right? But then we're like, we're only in Paris for 5 weeks this time. Do we want to take a long weekend and fly to another country, or do we just like spend time in Paris? So we ended up deciding to stay, but it's like kind of like you can't do it all, right? So sort of do what feels right, right? Right. Yeah. And by the way, like you were talking about like your favorite part of a lot of times just sort of meandering, like wondering about walking about the city. I recently learned a French word. I don't know if you know this one. It's called flaneur, Flaneur. It's a French word that literally describes a person who take joy just aimlessly, like wandering through the city and sort of soaking in like the urban cosmopolitanness.
Okay.
So yeah, you're a flaneur, like Flaneur.
Got it.
Flaneur.
Flaneur,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I am fluent in French, so I actually technically have a high school degree from a French school, but
Right.
having not really lived in I mean, I can still speak French fluently, but like
Well, you should teach me. I'm
vocabulary.
looking for more conversation opportunity. Yeah.
But no,
Yeah,
but
but I
the
really
funny thing
like
is
that
like
word. So like I've been
really
trying
good.
it out. I was like, instead of digital nomad, I was like, are we digital flaneurs, right? Because nomad feels more high. I don't know, maybe just the connotation. It feels like higher velocity, right? So versus, like maybe flaneur, like will imply like a slower, more sort of, layabout, more of a, sort of sophisticated type of wandering the world.
Yeah. I guess it's like it's hard to put label on things because there are just people travel in very different ways. Like for me, for
Right.
the longest time, like I think after like you talked about COVID being a time where things have shifted. For me, they've shifted in terms of from wanting, like before COVID, I was working hard. I was my mode was about I quit my job to build a startup, and so it was very much like I cannot just be like enjoying life. Like yes, I
Right.
can do things remotely, but I need to work and build and create and yes, like
That is 100% American, right? It's like, no, like I cannot enjoy life. I need to like grind, right?
I mean, I was enjoying life. So it was very much like, oh, let's go. We're in this new town. Let's go there. But at the same time, it's like, okay, I've got a few hours here. Let me grab my laptop. Let me make
Right.
progress on my deadline, self-imposed deadlines and on my,
Right. Right.
long to-do list. And there was a moment during COVID when I remember having a conversation with a good friend of mine. And then I think she said specifically, hey, you don't have to do anything. Just chill and relax. And very much what I was working on was focused on small businesses. And then they all shut down. So basically I couldn't make progress on my work. And so I was she's like, just take a break, enjoy life. And then when things get back to normal, do it. And so most of my travel from that point on became what I call very much a sabbatical trip. Like, I do a bit of consulting on the side. I run a couple of things online where I have a team that's managing things. So I didn't have a lot of work. And so, I had some passive income coming in and I could just focus on enjoying life. And then there was it was a switch. And so then when I had to I would meet, people that I would say maybe are living a more classical digital nomad lifestyle where they're like, oh yeah, I'm spending 8 hours a day working. I've got deadlines, I've got meetings. And I was like, nah, maybe I'm taking a long sabbatical. Is kind of how I started describing it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, you can just tell people you're independently wealthy. That definitely.
But that's not. But that's I have more of a challenge with that because people. So that's the other thing, right? People hear that you're traveling for a while and you're going to so many countries and they're like, oh, you must be like rich or
Right.
financially independent. It's like, no, I mean, I'm good. I think it goes back to the point you were making. Like, we're absolutely lucky and privileged to have to be able to be healthy, to have enough maybe financial means, not to have to worry about keeping a roof on top of our head or putting food on the table for next month. You know what I mean? But at the same time, it's like, yeah, but you don't have to be retired or financially
No.
independent to get there. It's like,
Right.
yeah, if you have enough savings, and if the ability to generate money, whether it's later when you get back or while traveling, it's like, yeah, it's just, instead of waking up every week and being in the same place the whole year, well, every few weeks or every few months or every few days, you change
Sure.
the bed you sleep in and the city you're in.
Right. I mean, the conversation I had with my kids just this past weekend, the way I was gonna obviously trying to be a wise parent, right, to share my experience, right. But I think the framework that I came up with probably apply back to myself, which is, when you are more stationary, there are a lot more boxes that are pre-built that you can just like check, right?
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean it requires no work. A lot of them require tremendous work and effort, right, to be able to check that box. But the difference is like the box has been built, right? So what I mean is like, the promotion or, like winning a trophy, right? Or participating in a sports team, right? Like those are constructs that are well defined, right? And built by others. So then you're like, I don't have to create the concept of soccer and then organize a team in order to join, right? Like their soccer team, you just like sign up and then you're in, right? And then you work hard, then you win championship, right? Because it
Mhm.
takes effort, but it's predefined. Versus, I think the lifestyle we're doing right now, there are a lot less of pre-constructed boxes,
Mhm.
right? So on one hand, it affords you the freedom to construct your own, right? But the downside is, right, and it depends on where your mindset is at, right? The downside, potential downside is because there are a lot less pre-constructed boxes, if you don't build your own, if you don't define it, you could have a really good time, traveling the world. But at the end of it, compared to people who live a stationary lifestyle, they'll have like a long list of boxes that they have checked during this entire time.
Yeah.
Versus you'd be like, I just had a really good time. I have no boxes to show for it. It's not necessarily bad, right? But it's like it is an opportunity for you to take that flexibility and do something with it. You don't have to, but you can. Just be clear-eyed about what we are doing, right? Because you don't want to end up in a situation where you land and you compare to peers who never went anywhere, and you are resentful that they have a long list of boxes and you have nothing.
Yeah.
Either you just be comfortable with the fact that I don't have any boxes checked, and that's fine, or you sort of intentionally build and construct your own boxes, and that's great as well. Just don't be sort of like shocked at the end. It's like, oh my god, I'm like behind, right?
Yeah.
People, right, who didn't go anywhere,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, I totally relate to that, and I feel like I've had a similar conversation where people come to me for advice, and I think that it's like it started even before, like it's like even the let's quit the job to go do a startup as an example. It's like live in the golden handcuffs and live in invested stock to be able to
Right,
go maybe take some risk, right? So that's like one version of it. Another version of it is, oh, I just want to take a break, or I want to go travel the world, and sometimes it goes back to what you were saying around, yeah, maybe if you take a year off or 2 years off to go travel the world, yeah, maybe you have a gap in your resume now.
right,
And maybe
yeah,
your 401k doesn't have as much money in it. And
right,
maybe, all of these other things that somebody that stayed on the path,
right,
uh, like that those boxes, like, well, there's a predefined path, you just follow it. You can live the American dream, or you can take risk, whether it's quitting and building a startup, or it's about
right,
just going traveling or being a digital nomad, or maybe you're not climbing the corporate ladder as fast, or maybe you're not winning as many championships, and so being like really taking a step back and
right,
thinking about what do I want for myself, what
right,
do I value, what's important to me. I feel like those are the important conversations to have first, not just
right,
follow because some a bunch of people on Instagram are showing this incredible lifestyle traveling. It's like, I think it's more about,
Which
what.
never ever looks like that when you get there. Like ever. I have never once got to a place like, yes, that looks exactly like that Instagram.
Yeah. I mean,
So
I think,
it's all an illusion, right? Like you have to decide what do you want, which is frankly the hardest part, whether you're stationary or nomadic. Either way, I don't think it makes it any easier. It's just like, what do I actually want? Because I think that is the hardest question, right, ever.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'm just trying to, like, I was thinking back about when I made those choices. For me, it was all about kind of projecting in the future and looking back and being
Right.
able to say, yeah, by saying yes to this, I'm saying no to these other things. Am I okay with that?
Right.
And I think for me, again, it's very personal, but when I made that choice, I didn't want to look back in time and regret not having at least tried.
Yeah. Right.
And,
And this is like, it feels like corporate speak, but one of the things that, I learned when I was at Amazon, when I was working there, right? One of the things that the company often talk about is one way to make high quality decision is to use what they call the regret minimalization framework, which is like when you confront with a decision where it's very not obvious which one you should take, right? Make the one that you think you will be less likely to regret in the future, even if it turns out to be a failure, right? Which one are you going to look back and wonder more? Be like, oh, I wish I had done that. Then go do that, because even if it fails, even if it doesn't turn out to be what you think it is, at least you are less likely to be filled with regret in the future. Right. And I think that actually works well, right? Not just for work, but for everything, right? Just like if your goal is to not, sort of be, in your deathbed or when you're about to be transformed into a digital consciousness, you don't look back and say like, oh man, I wish I had gone down that path. Why didn't I go down that path? Right. So like that seemed to work out better. Right.
yeah.
But it's hard, right? It's very, very hard to in a way to do the work, right? To figure out who are you and what do you want. And I think in a way the next layer of complexity for myself specifically is for my kids, right? They're not at the level of maturity. It's not reasonable to ask, kids this young to have that level of self-actualization. Or maybe they're in some way more ahead than adults in this regard, right? But in a way, like I am making life choices for them, right? That's quite the responsibility, right? Because it's easier for me to channel and say like, oh, I am less likely to regret this decision myself. But I have less certainty, right, making that decision on behalf, of my kids, right? So that part, I haven't quite get the hang of it.
Yeah, but I do think, I mean, I guess, every kid is different, but I do feel that it is such an enriching experience, and some of the skills that you have to learn in terms of adaptability, in terms of, cultural awareness, there are so many benefits that I think in the long term, they will potentially serve them well, especially like, knowing your kids a little bit. I feel like they're, well-grounded kids in a way.
Well, I hope so, right? And I think that's the thing, right? In a way, maybe that's no different than any parenthood decision, right? Even for stationary, you're still making decision on behalf of your kids, right? That later on, they might regret and blame you for it. And I think that's just a risk you take as a parent. Maybe that has nothing to do with being nomadic or not. But I think nomadic lifestyle is less common, right? It is not normal, right? In the statistical sense of the things, right? So when you're the adult, there's like, well, you know what? I can make decisions for myself, right? Like it's my life. I can do whatever I want with it, right? So I don't care, whether it's normal or not, right? But then when it comes to your kids, there's definitely more paranoia. It's like maybe it's easier and maybe it's better to do the normal thing, right?
Yeah.
For your kids. Because what if this turned out to be a terrible decision, right? And it kind of screws them up, right? As much as friends and family who care tells you like, oh, what an amazing experience, right? Like they're gonna do so well, blah blah blah, right? Like in the back of your head, right? You still are paranoid about like you'll be easier. At least it is one of those things where maybe I will have less blame, less responsible for being blamed in the future,
Mhm.
right? By your kids when they're grown up. Oh, why did you do this weird ass things, right? You could have just, leave me, give me a normal childhood, right?
Sure.
Right, right. So in a way that's part of the more unusual risk you're taking as a nomadic family instead of just a nomadic individual adult, right?
I guess we talked a bunch about the kids. I'm curious about your relationship with your wife Sky and how this travel experience has shifted or changed your
Right.
relationship or challenged it, or just curious on that dynamic.
It's kind of funny. My wife and I talked about this, how actually it turns out to be no big deal in terms of our relationship. I think, again, it's COVID. I think since 2020, March of 2020, right, since the world locked down, right, um, my wife and I counted. It's like, I don't think we have actually been apart from each other, where like we're not spending like 24 hours together in the same physical space for like maybe no more than like a week,
Mhm.
right? Because she has always worked from home, given her employment flexibility, and then obviously since COVID, right, I have been effectively either work from home or have like very flex, between office and working from home. So effectively, um, we have been in each other's space, right? Like on a daily basis since 2020, right? And I think it's one of those things where like, yeah, I think we are fond of each other because we have not murdered each other yet, right? And there's no sign that is about to happen, knock on wood, right? Right. So because of that, right? Like since COVID and moving to New York and like before we even sat on the road, right? We have spent solidly 24/7 with each other every day for 3 years, and we're very fond of each other's company, right? So then we thought like, okay, well then doing this on the road, maybe it'll be the same. And I think, yeah, no, I think it's been great, right? So obviously we're able to sort of explore the world together, right? And obviously we have to now count on each other for a lot of logistics and like schooling and all that, right? But it's been great. I think the as not just my wife and I, right, but that's a whole family, like unequivocally we can say, right, like I think the time we have together, right, essentially definitely make us closer than ever. And I think my wife and I mean, we've been together long enough that in a way that's predictable. But with kids, right, moving into the teenage year where they naturally want to sort of pull away from you and have their own social circle, um you know in a way we kind of bought ourselves a little more time, right? Like it's going to happen anyways, right? I think we're fully counting on them, right, like roll their eye and not want to do anything with this, right? It's very normal, it's very natural. We want that to happen, right? But in a way we bought ourselves a little bit more time of being like just the four of us before the kids are kind of off to their own rich and interesting life of their own, right?
Yeah.
So we bought ourselves more time, which is one thing that you can never get back, right? Like, right, yeah. So
Yeah. Make the most of, yeah, the time you have together while they want to spend time with you.
right, exactly, right. Because I mean, we obviously we stay in touch with a lot of other families, right, with similar age kids, right, and they're middle school, they're heading to high school, and they're having the very classical challenges and have their own social circle, which is perfectly normal. But we don't have a lot of that right now, right? So again, you can stay paranoid as parents forever. It's like, oh, are we screwing them up by not giving them like that kind of sort of opportunity to rebel and have their own social circle, right? But I think we're weighing, it's like, no, we want to give them that. We're going to keep adjusting our mode to give them more independence, but we squarely got more quality time, right, with just the four of us, right, than otherwise would have been possible.
Yeah.
Right. And if
So
that just means that the kids know less about Skibbity Toilet, I'm okay with that.
yeah.
I don't know if you know about Skibbity Toilet, and if you don't, you should find yourself very lucky.
I think I know what they are.
Yeah, yeah. Did you know Michael Bay has acquired the film rights to Skibbity Toilet? So in 2 years, get ready for a Transformer style action movie featuring Skibbity Toilet. It's going to
All
happen.
right.
That'll be a terrible day.
Yeah, yeah. Let me
Yeah.
ask you a different question. Like,
Yes.
one of the main challenges that people really talk about a lot with lifestyle is the relationships. And so whether it's extended family in terms of friends, how do you think about um, managing those relationships, maintaining the ones that you care about, being able to spend enough time with close friends and family, where potentially when you're in a specific place and they live there, it's easier to spend more quality time together versus
Right.
when you're all around the world,
Of
you
course.
may not spend as much time together. So how do you manage a relationship with friends and family who are not with you at all times now?
I mean, one of the upside, of course, living in the kind of the digital connected age we are, right, is that while this is not the same as, going to a pub and grabbing a drink, and be able to like slap each other in the back, right? Like it's not the same. It offers an opportunity to maintain the connection a lot more easily than if this doesn't exist, right? Like if I have to write letter correspondence, right, or send telegram, right? Like it will be impossible to maintain most of your relationship. It's just not going to be possible, right? So with all these digital tools, I think I have been maintaining a lot of the sort of the relationship that we had. Again, not the same. And I think when it's digital, I don't know if you can build your relationship, enrich it beyond a certain point. I think digital communication allows you to maintain and you can deepen your relationship, but I think there's a hard limit you'll run into where you
Mhm.
can't go beyond, because beyond that, I think is very much in the realm of, in the same room, right? Real world, type of relationship building. But it doesn't mean then you have to let all your relationships sort of atrophy and fade away. You can invest using the modern tool we have and sort of get your relationship that you care about and keep it at this sort of a hard stop level,
Mhm.
right? So you could do that, right? And then when you have the opportunity to be in the same room, in a way, it becomes more precious, right? Right. So then when you do have the opportunity, right, then it's like as if no time has passed at all, as if you were to sort of maintain it while you have distance between you, right? So I think that's kind of how I have been doing it. And obviously there are friends that I miss that haven't been in the same room for many years, right? So I look forward to those kind of opportunity. But the digital communication, right, definitely allowed me to sort of maintain a okay level of connection,
Mhm.
with all the people that I care about. What I think that I have been doing that's interesting is like I keep looking for opportunity in a way maybe to compensate to resurrect relationship that might have faded as I'm moving through the world, right?
Mhm.
I will basically, because the blessing and the curse of social media, right? As I can often find it's like, hey, I didn't know so and so is living at that city I'm about to go to. So I would just do a blind reach out, right? And say, hey, I know it's been 10 years, right? For whatever reason, right? Essentially, our relationship has, sort of faded because of everything that happens. But I'm here. I love to, reconnect, right? And sometimes, of course, you get nothing. But once in a while, right? People's like, yeah, right. It's been forever. That's do it, right? So I think that's been interesting, right? The opportunity, because if someone moves away and you didn't invest the effort, to maintain that relationship digitally, usually means it's gone, right? Usually it doesn't come back. It'll be usually very hard to just reach out over an email. It's like, hey, I know it's been 10 years, but you want to hang out over Zoom, right?
Yeah.
Usually it's strange, right? But when you send that email, it's like, hey, I know it's been 10 years, but I'm going to be in Budapest, right? And I think that's where you are right now. Love to meet up,
Yeah.
right? In a way, like you get this sort of like you get to time travel, right? Because you get in, they were like, oh my god, like we all both look like fatter and wrinklier, but right, it's as in a way like as if no time has passed, right? So that part has been kind of unexpectedly magical.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I can relate. Now you got me thinking about some of the get-togethers with all the high school friends that I haven't seen in,
right,
20 years and being able to be like, oh yeah,
right,
kind of nostalgic dinner of, remembering all those great moments.
right, exactly, right. So I think it's an interesting age we live in, right? To be able to move around, to be able to stay in contact, right? So I think it just comes down to being intentional, right? About like what is it that you want to do with the travel, with your relationship, with your family, right? It's like kind of being intentional about like what is it that I actually want, right,
Mhm.
out of these things, right, and being respectful of what others want themselves, right, and trying to figure out how to make that work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so
Okay.
it's been interesting.
I bring us some good. I mean, another thing that personally for me has worked well is also being able to go to destinations where your friend, your family is or your friend, and then that's something where I know you spent some time in Asia, and as an example, you spent time with your wife's family. So like you have the option to go and spend extended period of time versus for many, like I grew up with my family being overseas. And so,
Right,
if you live in a corporate life, you get so many days to go spend time with
right,
your parents or with
right,
your uncles. And so versus now you can be like, oh, I'm just gonna go spend a month or two where they live and
right,
actually spend quality time with them. So I find
for
that
sure.
that's been one of the luxuries
Oh, for
around
sure.
having this kind of lifestyle is I think I've spent more time with my family than I would otherwise would have the
Right.
opportunity to.
It is really the precious thing, right? Is time, right? Because when you have 2 weeks, when you have 3 weeks, right? I know so many friends, right, back in the U.S., right, who are sort of doing the American corporate thing, right, where they have 3 weeks, right? So the constant struggle is, do I spend that time going where my family is, right, and sort of invest in that, or do I get an opportunity to actually see the rest of the world, right? And obviously, it depends on your situation, right? You have to pick one because you can't do both. You have 3 weeks, right? So in a way, like you feel regret no matter which one you do. Like I have friends who only go visit their family, and they actually secretly hate it because they feel like the little bit of time away from work that they have, right? They have to go home and get nagged at, right? That's what it feels like, right? Instead of like exploring this exotic world, right? But then people who sort of like, no, I'm gonna go see the world, and they worry about their parents aging, and they're not spending as much time with them and the grandkids, right? Like and they worry that they will be filled with regret, when they pass, which will happen, right? So in a way, like they're sort of guilt ridden or full of resentment, either way, right? So the gift of time, right? It's like I'm going to do both,
Yeah.
right? It's special, right? And also, who knows how long you have this precious gift, right?
Yeah.
Even if you intend to be completely open ended and do this forever, right? Things happen, right? So you don't know, right?
No,
Whether just because you want to that you can't, right?
no, I mean it goes back to that, we're privileged in many ways. Like, I have a good friend of mine who, I mean, he's younger than me, but he unfortunately has health issues that
Right,
really restrict his life. And so from the outside, you will think the person is living a normal life, but inside it's just been very challenging where, we often talk about, and he loved traveling and he did a bunch of it, but it's always like, I wish I could do more now. And so,
sure.
every time you have that kind of conversation, you realize that, well, yeah, you know,
Yeah, just I think in a way being grateful, right? Being aware, whatever life circumstances you have, right? That right, you everyone has their sort of privilege and good luck, right? And take advantage of it, right? Because you don't know how it lasts, like anything, any of it,
yeah.
right? Right. So I think that's the part, right? But at the same time, right? Don't let that weight you down, right? It's like, oh my god, I gotta squeeze every second out of this, right? Like I'm gonna relax the hell out of this beach, right?
Yeah.
So it's all life is full of paradox, right? Because that's what makes it interesting.
100%.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a different set of questions, more on the
Sure.
professional side.
Yeah,
Like
please.
firstly, as you think about this lifestyle, how do you manage time zones? Because that's one of the common things that many people face, or they may restrict themselves to a certain part of the world because of that. And so for you, I know most of your team, you're running a company, you have a lot of
Right.
responsibilities, but at the same time, you have a team that's remote first, I believe. And so you have
Right.
people in different time zones. So how do you think about that, and how do you work around that when you think about your travel schedule?
Well, I mean, my current company, right, and my previous company was remote as well, right? But I think there's remote and then there's remote, right? I think my previous company remote is kind of the more classic kind of work from home, right? And then if you're going to be at a different location, right, then you need to manage the time zone, you need to ask for permission and like all these different sort of like, sort of more checks, in place before you can partake, right? Versus, whereby where I am now, right? It is sort of an extreme form of remote, which is we have a tell policy, not an ask policy in terms of changing location. So if you're gonna move location, just like, hey, just let people know. Like you don't have to ask anyone's permission for it, right? It's like, hey, I'm just gonna go work in Malta for a month. I'm like, okay, cool. Thanks for letting us know. That's it, right? Like there's no like, can I, right? Or is 2 months too long, right? We're like, we don't care, right? You figure it out, yourself, right? Just let people know, right? And I think the culture has always been, it's not even remote first, it's remote only, right? Like we never had an office. It's not like, oh, because of COVID, we went remote. The company has never had an office, right? So the remote only, it created a lot of sort of cultural norm that is really nice, right? And it's something that I very intentionally keep investing into, right? So for instance, we try to keep any sort of, you know, synchronous live meeting to a minimum, like really to a minimum, right? Because when you have synchronous live meeting, then you have to be very time zone aware. That's just how it is, right? So he's like, oh, if it's 2 a.m. for me, but it's 4 p.m. for you, like, how's that going to work, right? So we try to, it's like, well, one way to make that less painful is just like, let's have as little of that as the standard as humanly possible, right? Be very intentional about scheduling live meeting. It's like almost nothing could not be discussed, like async over Slack. Like 90% of things can be discussed over Slack, right? So they just do discuss async, right? And if you need lots of people, is it to have a discussion? Is it to have an update? If it's just an update, then just send an update. Like don't like have a 10-person meeting just to share update, right? Like be very, very intentional about live meeting, right? So I think all these sort of norm that the company had that, I keep investing into in a way selfishly also help, keeping that sort of time zone awareness need, to a lesser degree, right? So that's been great, right? So most of the team, most of the time is Central European time zone, right? But then because people move around, right? People are everywhere, right? So therefore, just keeping that in mind. And I think there is also an expectation internally that the few live meetings, that involves larger group, it is never mandatory, right? It's never mandatory, right? So essentially, those meetings are always recorded, right? The transcription, summary, then the recorded video is always available as part of the cultural norm, right? So like do not wake up at 3 a.m. to participate. Just don't, right? Right. So watch it, participate, ask question, async afterward. That's totally fine, right? So I think there's a lot of these sort of norm that make that a lot easier to manage. Does it still happen? Sure, right? But we very intentionally make it less impactful than it would have been otherwise. Right? But I am very aware, like not most companies don't invest in remote work norm, right, to that degree, because I think there's different expectation in terms of what does remote mean, right? I think the word remote work actually covers a lot of subtlety that I think a lot of companies haven't explicitly sort of articulated. Like, does remote mean work from home, and home is something within a reasonable commute time to the office? So I say, like, if I need you to come in tomorrow, you can, right? Like there's that level of remote where like I know exactly where you are. It asks permission to leave, and you're within, a reasonable commute distance. They can come in person with very short notice, all the way to kind of where we are, which is right. We're just sort of aware where everybody is, but everything is async. Everything is globally distributed, and you don't have to ask permission for anything, right? And then like all sorts of shade in between. And I think a lot of time companies don't invest the time to figure out exactly what kind of remote culture they have and or want, and then very intentionally invest in infrastructure, processes, and best practices and culture to make that really, really work, right? So I think it's an area where I think that's why for a lot of companies it's easier. It's like just come back to the office because we know how that works, right? Right. But then if you're a company that are committed to being right remote first or remote only, then it behooves you to go deeper. Like, what kind of remote culture do we have? And what do we want? And how do we sort of bridge that gap? Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
So do
I
you
think
think?
if their best practices in this area are still evolving, right? So I think people are still all trying to figure it out on their own. Versus office life, right? There's like a century worth of best practice, right?
So the general trend over the last, the post-COVID, with COVID, it went work remote to let's get back to the office. Do you feel like a lot of the let's get back to the office is because those companies didn't really invest in putting in place the right frameworks, the right best practices, the right workflows, training,
Well,
whatever?
I think I'm cognizant, of course, right? Part of the reason why RTO seem to be happening, right? Return to office is because of shareholder pressure, right? The investors just in a way psychologically feel better knowing that like I know exactly where all the people are,
Mhm.
right? And then there's a comfort, like, and then I know that they're being monitored, that they're being productive and whatever, right? So a lot of time, management, even if they want to keep everything remote, they're facing that pressure from their shareholder. And I have faced it too, right? In previous company as well, where the shareholder would just ask management, it's like, well, isn't it better if everyone is back in the office? Isn't it better that you can, brainstorm, that you can like, be able to more closely monitor and all these different things, right? So I think management in a way have to be willing and ready to push back on the argument, right? With conviction, right? Because you have to say, no, actually it's been great, right? Actually, like these are the benefit, right? And the cost is minimized, like why it is better, why you have conviction that the remote work is better, right? And I think at the end of the day, where you have a lot of time these companies that are going back to the office, I feel, is that managements are usually either ambivalent toward in office life or remote. They're like both were okay, right? They're not like strong preference for remote, right? It was just like COVID forced them to do it, so they did it, and like it was fine. But when the shareholders start pushing them, right, to bring people back, they weren't really ready or willing to push back, right? They're just kind of like, remote's actually pretty okay, but you know what? The shareholders really kind of, up my ass, right, about bringing people back. So fine, let's do it. Because actually, I'm not against being in office either. So fine, let's do it, right? And I think, of course, there's some hidden agenda, I think, behind some of the RTO in terms of like a shadow layoff, right? Like bringing people back means people are going to resign, which is like great. Then I don't have to pay them any severance because they resigned. I think there are some hidden agenda in some of the return to office call, but I think fundamentally, I think the biggest one is that senior leaders are not committed to remote work in the first place. Therefore, they're now willing to sort of invest in the best practice, pushing back various stakeholders who want people to come back for not necessarily any sensible reason, besides that's what I know.
Yeah.
Right.
That
So,
makes sense.
so I think that's it. But I think from what I'm seeing also is that the company that are moving to return to full-time office are the ones that were really already in like kind of hybrid mode, right? Where like, oh, you're supposed to spend 2 days a week in office, and 2 days becomes 3 days becomes 5, right? Like that's kind of how it tend to go. And actually, I don't necessarily disagree with that in a way, because hybrid in a way to me is the worst, right? I think fully remote has of course a lot of advantage, and I think being fully in office also has a lot of advantage. I prefer remote more, but I can understand why 100% office has a lot of advantage. I think hybrid, which is the sometimes remote, sometimes in the office, is actually the hardest, right? It's the hardest to make work, to sort of coordinate, structure, norm, best practice around it. You end up with this situation where like the office is always half empty when you're in it. And when you're in the office, you're just spending time in video call with people who are working from home. So they're like, why did I commute to be in front of a computer screen all day when I can do this, you know, at home, right? It's like the worst of both worlds, right? So I think I'm seeing very little example of company that were 100% remote going to office. It seems to be the company that are doing hybrid, right? Like 3 days working remote, 2 days in the office. Those are ones are all inevitably going to full-time in office, because hybrid is the hardest to make work.
Yeah.
Right. So I think you're going to end up with, in a way, just two camps, not the in between. You will have 100% remote or 100% in office, not the hybrid.
You bring some great points. And I think ultimately I look at it from a cultural perspective. If you have the right culture on one side or the other, like it doesn't really, like if you have the culture of getting things done, of holding people accountable. Now, and then you hire the right people, then it doesn't really matter. It's like if you have some people that prefer to be in the office and they're most productive in that environment, and the majority of your employees fall in that camp, then trying to be remote is not the right fit, and vice versa. If some people do their best work when they've got more flexibility, when they're able to not have to waste 2 hours commuting back, in and out of the office. And so if that's the right value, the right culture within the company and the right employees, then great. I feel like most of the time, like the culture goes downhill because a bunch of people want to be remote, they're forced into the office, so then they don't like the company, they don't like being in the office anymore, so they're not productive anymore. So yeah, it's been an interesting kind of transition, at least looking at it from the outside, mostly over the last few years for different companies.
Yeah, so I think this saga is not done, right? But also, like, it feels like more of a, I don't know, it's more of a Western and more American of an argument. Because I think, like, for instance, in East Asia, in last part of the world, there was never remote work, right? Remote work was like 2 weeks in the height of COVID, right? So that was never even remotely a norm, right, for the corporate world, right? So I think is Western European and American, and really more American, right? Because American, I mean, hopefully this didn't get too political, right? But U.S. made kind of COVID sort of a mess, so a lot of company end up having to enable remote a lot longer, right, than they might have preferred. But in a way, the upside of that is, 2 years in of remote, people's like, that actually worked pretty well, right? Like, I don't see anything that's wrong, it's broken. So then when you start pulling people back into the office, right, people can very credibly push back, be like, tell me exactly what was wrong with how we were working during the remote time. Point to me exactly what I didn't do, right? That was bad, right? And I think in a way you're sort of seeing that sort of argument play out, versus in most of the world, it's always been office. And even COVID, like, they were maybe working from home for like a week or two, and that was it, and they were back. So in a way, it's great. Well, because that's usually a sign that they actually manage COVID better, right? But one of the few downside is they never really got the opportunity to experiment with remote working properly, to discuss whether, like, can we make this, our norm, right? Like, they just never were forced to do it. So therefore, most of the world, if you're a white collar office worker, you are in the office 5 days a week, 6 days a week.
Yeah.
Right. So in a way, managing COVID properly is mostly a good thing, but one of the few missed opportunities is be able to actually properly figure out whether remote working is something that can work for you, your company, right? So we'll see how this goes, right? Maybe as more successful example, remote working that deliver great product, great result, sort of keep happening. Maybe that will inspire more companies to do it, because there will, hopefully, knock on wood, no more reason where you have to remote work. So now it's about choosing to remote work.
Yeah. No, 100%. I do think that's going to be the what's going to shift the conversation, is when you have really successful companies that design all of their culture and workflows and the way they work together in a way to be successful. Then it's almost like it's a new management framework. It's kind of like, you want to run a remote, only a remote first company, this is the playbook to do it right. And if you want to run a company the traditional way, this is the playbook. And so I think they're very different playbooks, as you were saying, and it's we'll see how it plays out over time.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the topics I wanted to ask you about is around finances. And so really with the context of thinking about other families, maybe they want to approach a similar thing. Maybe they have some really young kids and they're starting to project out, maybe we want to do that a few years ago. Can you maybe help maybe break it down or demystify or slash maybe what are, how do you prepare for it? And how do you think about the typical budget for, a family like yours living in Seattle or New York, and to be able to shift to this kind of lifestyle and do it in a successful way? And how does the budget how does it compare when you're traveling versus when you're maybe sedentary?
So I fully acknowledge my current financial situation, work situation. I think within the realm of all the nomads I met is very much in the minority, right? Because I have a full-time corporate role running an established company. That is extremely rare, right? So put that aside, right? I think that's not how we started. That's how we ended. How we started, I think, in a way, is more typical, where neither of us worked, right? We had a budget. It was sort of time capped for a year, right? And I think if I go back to that time period, the insight I can share is if you're coming from one of the, I guess, American context, or really anywhere, if you live in one of the big metropolitan areas in the world or in the US, like one of the coastal city, you will squarely save money when you travel the world, right? I think because people have a vacation mindset as default, that sounds crazy, right? Like, how can you possibly be going to all these places, traveling the world, and save money? I guarantee you will save money because, some of these places, right, whether Seattle, New York, like Milan, Paris, like it is some of the most expensive pockets in the world, right? So just by leaving those areas, right, your costs will go down. But it's not even just that, right? I think the nomadic lifestyle, not a vacation lifestyle, the nomadic lifestyle guarantees you will have less stuff. You're just going to buy less things because you're like, I have to carry it. What the hell am I going to use this thing for if we're moving around? And it is incredible how much money you save when you just stop buying crap you don't actually use. Like there's no better way to put that, right? I mean, my wife and I talk about how when we're living in New York, right? Like because we both work from home, sometimes we go to Costco during the day, and we had a minivan, right? And we distinctly remember going to Costco, just the two of us, and we filled the minivan where the back trunk, the third row, the second row, all filled, and my wife had to put things in her lap. We filled a minivan of stuff from Costco, and we're like, what the hell were we buying where that seemed like a really good idea? Because I'm sure at that moment, it's like, no, we need all these things. Now, when you're living in a backpack, one suitcase lifestyle, you're like, what the hell were we buying, right? What were we consuming exactly? In a way, it's like this, you look back, it's like, it was almost like a consumeristic fog, where it's like, I'm sure it all makes sense at the moment, but for the life of me, I cannot understand what the hell was happening when you step out of it, right? So you will save money. And I think one of the interesting insight, even just in daily consumption habit, once you leave the American car-centric suburban lifestyle behind, what I learned is if you have to carry all the grocery, even just grocery that you buy, you have to carry it. You have to walk a few blocks back to your Airbnb, your flat with it, and you have to potentially walk up some stairs. You're going to just buy less things. You just like physically don't have the capacity to buy those things, right? When you have a car, you can just throw in a trunk and drive into your garage and unload into your house. You're just going to buy less things because like, I don't want to have to carry it, right? It's like all these little things, right? That adds up, right? I think especially in the US, in a way, it is perfectly streamlined, designed for consumption, ease of consumption, assortment of selection in the store, ease of e-commerce deliverance, huge houses, big car that you can store and transport stuff, right? Like, like 30-day risk-free return, amazing customers, like everything is geared for consumption. And when you leave that, it's a downside because like, oh my God, buying stuff is harder, more labor intensive, and more expensive in general relative to local wage, almost everywhere you go. The upside is then you will just consume less. It just happens. And it's kind of crazy that once you do it for a while, you look back like, what the hell was I buying?
Yeah.
Right. Right.
No, it's funny. Like it's almost you start missing some of the convenience, and so then the
Yeah.
pattern is every time
Right.
I find myself in the US, I'm like, oh great, I need to order all those things from Amazon and get them and be able to try it and return it. And
Yeah.
so I look back at my if I was to like look over the the year, it's like whenever I'm in the US, my consumption definitely
Yeah.
skyrockets. Part of it is because I might wait for certain purchases when I'm back in the US, but then yeah, totally like
I
yeah.
remember the first time went back to US after traveling for a bit. Like we were flying out of Charles de Gaulle in Paris, and I remember like as we are beginning to taxi onto the runway, I took out my phone and I opened my Amazon box and I hit checkout, and it was like 47 items, right? Like that's now getting delivered to our New York Airbnb, right? So when we showed up, like 12 hours later, like 20 some boxes is sitting outside Airbnb where we haven't even checked in yet, right? So in a way, it's like I got to mainline, right, the consumeristic withdrawal, right?
Yeah.
Not to knock it, like there is, of course, be able to get what you want exactly when you want at the price that is affordable. It is incredible privilege, but it is also enables you, right, to spend without thinking. So I think when that sort of fades, and you're just living in a more sort of confined space, you don't have as much space, you don't want as much space, right? Like all those things start to add up and your expenditures start to drop, right? In ways that it is actually hard to foresee when you're planning, before taking off in the US. Like it's hard. It's just hard to imagine how much less you'll be spending.
Yeah.
Right. And also it's hard for you to imagine how affordable things are once you leave like the US.
I mean, like, so I think there is the financial aspect. There's also the mental load as well, I find, around like having to, I don't know, cut your grass or do laundry
Yes.
or, even clean the place. Like most of the time, you may be in Airbnb, for like a short period of time where you do some light cleaning. But, like I'm just imagining like having a full house and having to do like a full cleaning or let me go to the garage and like empty up this or make some space for that or whatever. So there is all of that time that you get, or even the time to go to Costco. Like, I don't know, trying to get to Costco on the weekend is a whole trip.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, managing a 3,000 square feet detached American style suburban house with a lawn and everything, it is work. It is work or money or both,
Yeah.
right? You either do it or you have to pay someone to do it, right? Like all those things add up, right? And I think in a way, it is just sort of the air you breathe, right? If you're living in the US, like you don't even notice it. It's like, oh, yeah, of course, everyone does this, right? Right? Like you have to have a car. Of course, you have to take your kids to soccer practice. Of course, you have to run this errand and go to Target and do all these things. You have to, right? What else? As opposed to what, right? And I totally get it, right? Like that is the American lifestyle. But when you leave that bubble, they realize like, huh, if you're just trying to go grocery shop, you have to walk 3 blocks with a backpack. It turns out you're just going to buy less things, right? And also the other part is like, they're just not going to have as many things for you to buy.
Yeah.
Right. Like you might want that, caramel flavor Kinder's egg with that special surprise, but they don't have that. So you just can't buy it. And if you order from Amazon, it's going to come in 4 days and you have to walk 3 blocks somewhere to pick it up.
Yeah.
So you're just going to not want to do it. And it is actually mostly a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, definitely puts life in perspective in the US once you're back on the road. Before I know when I maybe close the conversation, I guess as a
Sure.
closing, I'd love to hear from you, like just sharing with people who are considering the same kind of lifestyle. Like, what advice do you have for them? Kind of like looking back, being able to say, all right, well, here are the 2 or 3, 4, 5, whatever tips where I'll definitely consider this thing before I embark in such a journey.
Sure. I think one not 100% required, but it is a nice backstop, right? Is obviously to have a certain amount of sort of financial nest egg saving cushion, right? You might not need it. Hopefully, you don't need it because things turn out to be a lot more affordable and opportunity to make money on the journey is actually plentiful. But peace of mind, right? Having that cushion it absolutely helps, right? Just sort of like worst case, you can land back and all that, right? So I think what, like, figure out what that cushion is, hit it before you take off. Hopefully you don't need it, but it helps, right? So that's definitely something, right? And I think the other part is there's no good time to do it. There's no right time to do it. There will always be a million reasons to not, pull up anchor and go, right? So if you're waiting for that perfect moment to do it, you will probably never come, and therefore you will never do it, right? And in a way, just sort of tell yourself like, and just because I go doesn't mean it's forever, right? I can come back anytime I want, right? My friends and family are not going anywhere, right? So in a way, it doesn't have to be this like dramatic moment where you're making an irreversible sort of commitment. It is very much a two-way door. You go, you can come back. If you don't like it, you can stop anytime. So don't wait for that perfect moment where all the stars and planets align before you go. Just go. And then, like, do a trial run, right? It's like, I'm just going to go for 3 months, right? And then you come back and like, that wasn't bad. I need a little bit more cushion. You learn, and then you sort of save up. But you have to do it as a, in a way, practice trial run for a nomadic lifestyle, not as like vacation. If you go on a 3-month vacation, you will not learn what you need to learn. You need to like ask if we're living on the road, but like for like 3 months. Then you come back, you're like, interesting, I need to make these adjustments. And then go for 6 months. And you do that a few times, and maybe at some point you will just like, and now it's open-ended. Right. Like that's another way to kind of get your get your sea leg, right? Like in a way, kind of practice, before you do it. So I think that's another one. And also just be really open to spontaneous opportunity and connection, right? Just like talk to people, meet people, right? Just be open, right? Because you're going to be exposed to ideas and opportunity and challenges, of course, right? That you cannot sort of foresee, right? So in a way, just be really open to that, right? Because your life will go directions that you can't imagine yet, right? The set of life possibility is definitely wider when you're nomadic than stationary. And it's like, it sounds like nothing if you're stationary right now. Like, it's like, what is that? What the hell does that mean? Right. But it's like, just the unexpected things will happen when you're on the road, right? So just be really open to it, because it will be strange and scary and weird, right? But it will mostly turn out to be wonderful. I think that's kind of how, those are my 3 little advice. And get a good VPN. A good VPN is good.
Yeah, well, I think those are some great tips.
Yeah, and maybe a travel router. A travel router is nice.
Okay. I would say, I mean, the other thing along those lines is the internet speed, like being able to know when you have important meetings like this conversation,
Yes.
and ensuring you have a good internet connection, else it can be
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, you have we use Google Fi as our sort of ultimate backup, because Google Fi has high-speed internet in most places. It is kind of expensive, so we use like the pay as you go. So if I turn it on,
Yeah.
it's just like a worst case lifeline. It's like, I must get on this call. Yes, it's 20 cents a megabyte or whatever, ridiculous, but it is available. So, you can, at least you have an option. Otherwise, you might be like, holy crap, like, this Airbnb Wi-Fi is garbage and I have to get on a call in 10 minutes. And you're just screwed, right? Like, having an emergency backup is another peace of mind, I guess.
Yeah. No, great tips. Like on that topic, like there are lots of eSIMs now that are pretty good, and you can pick them right away, and sometimes you can save a lot on data as well.
Yeah, but what my struggle with the eSIM is, it's very much kind of like it's kind of like how sometimes I need coffee to be awake enough in the morning to make coffee. eSIM has a problem. It's like, you need internet to be able to on the fly buy a eSIM to get internet. So that's the thing. Like, sometimes you're like, holy crap, like this thing doesn't work. I need an eSIM, but I don't have internet to buy an eSIM, right? So then,
so my little hack on that, and we can close on that, is having been to a bunch of countries, I actually have a Brazilian phone number now.
Yeah.
And it basically offers something very similar to T-Mobile,
Right.
but a
The
fraction of
low.
the cost. Yeah, it's kind of
Yeah.
like a global thing. And so that's been my new hack now. So if you're ever in Brazil,
Okay.
get
Yeah.
a local SIM card, and then you can add data. It basically gives you access to a bunch of, I think it gives you maybe at least a few gigs in a bunch of
Right.
countries at high speed. It gives you even more data than T-Mobile. And then
Right.
to top it off for the day is a lot cheaper than in the US rate. So
Yeah, because we thought we found a good alternative in France with free mobile, because like the prepaid phone mobile, they have a lot of country roaming coverage, but it turns out there's some asterisks. So when we landed in Egypt,
uh-huh.
we flipped it on, and then we just got immediately all both my Wi-Fi, both and I got charged like 50 € immediately,
I
right?
see.
Because it turned out there's like some country they have like an activation fee, right? So
Oh,
they're like, you have to be careful about like the hidden. Like most EU country was great. Like it was like, oh, we just use free data and you just add a little bit. It's very affordable. And then some countries suddenly we got like slammed like 100 € of like this hidden fee,
yeah.
right? So like they all have like their weird little terms and condition tricks, right? Especially I was like, wait, it's prepaid. How are you able to just immediately charge my credit card, because they held on to the credit card information for their prepaid,
Yeah.
right? So then they can just charge you. I'm like, oh, okay, holy hell, right? Right.
Well, the fun adventures of travel,
Right.
unexpected bills when
Exactly.
you don't expect it. Anyway, I know how we have to wrap it up. But
Yeah.
thank you so much for taking the time. Great
For
to have
sure. Yeah.
you being so open, sharing so many useful tips and advice for others, and I'm
Oh,
sure.
thanks for having me. Yeah, no, it's been fun, and I follow your adventure and your wisdom sharing as well. So I guess keep it up.
Oh, thank you. And I think we may overlap. I think at the end of the summer, I think either in New York or in Norway. So hopefully
Yeah.
we'll
Coming
get
up,
to
yeah,
meet.
because I'm in Azores, through June, and mostly New York, July and August.
Okay,
So yeah,
great. So let's do a happy hour together in August when
yeah,
I'm in New York then.
yeah, sounds good.
All
All
right,
right,
cheers.
man.
Thank you so much.